Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in an effort to keep everybody on time. Thank you for having us this afternoon. This is the Engaging with the Private Sector, or Can Private-Public Partnerships Be Successful panel. We've elected to really jump right in, so I'm going to start with an opening frame. Trust in a safe, secure, and resilient cyberspace is needed for a functioning global marketplace and for governments to negotiate both common calls and disagreements. But as our conference denotes, uncertainty is on the rise. In my career, I've never promised certainty. But I have always aimed to deliver confidence to government officials, to the public, to executives, to clients, and to partners. Clear-eyed relationships and well-oiled mechanisms between government and the private sector are essential to have confidence in cyberspace. And I'll add that results matter much more than just applauding activity. Our panel agreed, as I said, to be unafraid in exposing where private-public partnerships have failed and endeavor to offer current examples and future scenarios to grow our collective confidence in the durability of our cyberspace. We're going to start with Miguel. Please provide us an example of what's worked from your point of view, and how have you measured those results?
Okay, thank you. So I'm Miguel de Bruiker. I'm the Managing Director General of the Center of Cybersecurity Belgium, a small country. A few years ago, we created a mail address, suspicious@safeontheweb.be. And we said to the population, if you see something suspicious, forward it to us, we'll handle it. So instead of just explaining, this is a phishing mail, this is how you recognize it, don't click, we said, if you see something suspicious, send it to us. So after a few years now, we receive from the population 25,000 emails a day on average. That is for last year. So together with a private company, we evaluate all that information that is coming in. We have, by 8 o'clock in the morning, we have a view on what will be the campaigns that will be launched against our country massively this day. And then together with the internet service providers, with telcos, on voluntary basis, we have a DNS synchronization. So we filter out those malicious domains, we share that with them, and within a time frame of more or less 15 minutes, the whole population that is customer of those service providers, those telcos, and we cover more or less 90% of the country with that, they will receive a warning page instead of going to that website. And another quite important example is our SPI warning. Every week we evaluate, together with a private company, what are the most likely to be exploited vulnerabilities in our country. We do that together. We use our knowledge, our experience, and their experience, and we say, okay, this week we will scan the country for those vulnerable systems, and we will identify the owners and warn them. So it took us 2 legal frameworks to be able to do that, but it's together with that company we identify what is the most likely to be exploited vulnerability, or a small list, and we try to warn the owners of those systems.
So we started with some optimism, because I would encourage anybody in the audience that wants to see how these things can come together for the betterment of both companies and citizens to talk to Miguel. So we'll start with optimism, but as you know, this crowd isn't really known for optimism. But I'd like to stay there for a moment. Max, same question. An example from your perspective of what's worked and how do you measure the results?
Yeah, great, thank you for that. 1,100 days ago, we started one of our most enduring and results-driven collaborations with government, and that was just days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The story that's known is the steps taken to preserve their digital infrastructure so that they could continue to operate despite the Russian invasion. The story that is not known widely is one that I'll share today, and that's the extent to which AWS partnered with the Ukrainian government to help them thwart cyber threats. We collaborated with CERT Ukraine, and we proactively have identified phishing campaigns that get directed against Ukrainian government services. We've identified the internet domains that have been abused by APT29, widely attributed to be the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. In multiple instances, they were targeting these agencies and the enterprises and militaries and educational institutions with these phishing campaigns to steal credentials. That is not limited to Ukraine, as everybody here knows. That's really a digital cyber war on all of Europe. And the domain was impersonating AWS resources, and that's part of the public-private partnership. In defending the AWS cloud, we step in and we stop all of those types of operations, and then we advise CERT and we advise other affected customers about remediations and what steps they need to take. And the reason that is hugely important is because our digital foundations are just woven into everything that we do today. And so protecting ourselves from cyber activity and preserving our digital infrastructure is essential. And I think that's where the public-private partnership can still be strengthened. It's sometimes difficult doing these coordinations. But I think you said stay optimistic, right? But the opportunity that this presents, and in fact, like all the people in this audience, is we just have to figure out a better way for that partnership to work. And it's different depending upon each organization's capabilities, so you can't be too rigid and you can't be too prescriptive. But I think it's incumbent that we figure that out.
So I might say then coordinated defense can work, but now it gets interesting because to you, Tom, can you give us a counterexample of what hasn't worked and what are the consequences of it not working?
Yeah. First of all, I'm Thomas Seifert. I'm the CFO at Cloudflare. You wonder what a CFO does here. So I'm not an accountant. I'm a mathematician, and I own all of our data sciences at Cloudflare. Where it fails is pretty much the inverse of what you just said. Like AWS, we were part of the group of companies that onboarded Ukrainian infrastructure early and helped defend the country against the attacks. And you learn a lot. I think those collaborations work best when we allow industry to do what we are good at, to innovate and use modern products and remediations to be successful. Partnerships get problematic then, and we get concerned when governments try us how we solve technical problems. That slows us down. That doesn't help. And if there's one thing we learned in the Ukraine is that it requires a physical war, requires a speed and a type of collaboration that for most Western governments is just not in the DNA. Different organizations are not aligned. You have overlapping responsibilities. You have long processes to get funding to react. And when on top of that, very technical specific advices go out on how to solve, this is not helpful. Another really good example is we all remember Log4j, one of the worst software vulnerabilities we have seen in the last years, a huge attack against the Western supply chains. The defense worked well because the collaboration allowed every part in that team to work on what they are best at. Cloudflare is a part of the US Joint Cyber Defense Collaboration, and the government stepped back in terms of just coordinating the event and allowed industry what we do best. But I think it comes down to that, allowing us to focus on what we're really, really good at and finding a way to get literally warlike speed in the collaboration and the processes that enable us to do what we are good at.
So speed is essential. Speed is absolutely essential, and government can slow us down. So Jim, same question.
Well, Thomas stole my answer, but I'll do my best. Jim Higgins, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Snapchat. So I like to quote or misquote Churchill often. So I find that when it comes to cybersecurity, government and private sector are, two entities that are separated by a common language, right? We have the same enemies, we have the same attacks, but we don't have a very easy way to communicate with each other. So in tech, we live and die by innovation, right? That is the cornerstone of what we do, and that requires quick turnaround time feedback. We are more than willing to work with the public sector on that, but when we give information, it goes one way, and we don't know if that information works or if it doesn't work, or the speed in which these attacks are hitting us that we see because we have infrastructure all over the world. So we see all kinds of different attacks. These attacks are automated. They happen in seconds and minutes. We can respond just as fast, but we need government to help us because government has the authorities in the background to help disrupt these attacks. We do not. So we can point the way, but we need faster response from government. So we need a wartime mentality like Thomas was talking about. When we're under attack and it's significant enough, I can call Amazon, Google, whoever, and they're in lockstep with us. Then we call government and they will show up and they will help. But it has to be a significant attack. We need to take that same model and apply it to, lack of a better phrase, peacetime.
So we've established a baseline of what I call the headwinds and the tailwinds that either support or stand in the way of truly effective public-private partnerships. The private sector certainly brings speed and innovation. I'd add the leverage of the global markets and significantly competitive, hyper-competitive talent. To stand up for sort of our government friends, I was a public servant in various capacities for 15 years, so I feel like I need to. The government does bring unique authorities. It does bring the leverage of national and global stages, and it brings convening power. You would think combined, this is a great recipe for success. But I guess if we polled this room, many people would side to the headwinds, not the tailwinds, unfortunately. So let's explore a little bit further. This one to Tom. Where are the capabilities in the private sector that can uniquely enhance the results of these partnerships?
A couple of vectors. The one that comes to mind first is if you look at companies like Cloudflare or AWS, we see about 30% of all internet traffic today. We defend about 270 billion attacks a day across our network for millions of customers, most of the Fortune 500 companies. So the insight you have into what is happening out there is global. It is real time. Most of the cyber attacks on a nation state level are correlated. We talked about this in the previous panel to geopolitical events. So the insight we provide is real and real time and can drive different outcomes. I think this is a very big point. We talked in the previous panel about where AI is and whether it will come. It is already here today. We think often of cyber attacks as very sophisticated attacks, and there are some that are snowflakes. But most of the attacks from a technical perspective are very routine. Cyber actors depend on operational efficiencies. If they have business cases, they need reusable malware, they need a stable infrastructure to attack. And this is an opportunity to interrupt that assembly line of attacks. You need lots of data in order to do that, and I think this is what companies like us bring to the table.
So that's incredibly encouraging. It sounds like there are some things that are helping these partnerships move forward, some capabilities perhaps in the private sector. I'd put this question to you, Miguel. What more would you like to see? Tom just described all kinds of great capabilities. And could you imagine there being standard protocols or interfaces to make that collaboration attractive to the private sector?
Well, I understand that the governments are slow, but I would recommend, first of all, to work with Belgium then, of course. But just kidding. Now, we have a few examples, and there are some partners in here that can say that sometimes governments can work in a fast way. But, of course, we are bound to a lot of legal restrictions. And unfortunately, especially in the EU, we tend to make more laws to make it even more difficult and to help us out. But that said, I think that what companies could do is to try to hook up with the mechanisms that exist or deliver very often by governments. Let me give you one example. For instance, the digital identity. In my country, you are obliged to have a digital identity card on you all the time. I think the number of times that I had to show it to a police officer is like a handful of times in my whole life. I'm not that young anymore. When you take an airplane, you have to have a passport. When you open a bank account, you need some kind of ID. So for specific transactions, you have to more or less prove who you are. And these are mechanisms that are delivered by governments. Just as an example, I think that a lot of private companies could endorse, and LinkedIn, for instance, is more or less doing that with the verified accounts. But if you look at on websites, the extended validation certificates, maybe we should try to build a little bit further on that, so that if I go to a website of a bank, that I can really see, and I know we tried that, but we mixed up two different elements, meaning that it was not visible anymore. So the concept of having a validation of specific transactions, if you visit a website, if you receive a message or an email or a phone, that you know on the other side has the owner or the sender, has it been validated or not. So linking up mechanisms that exist in government with solutions that are being provided, for instance, in the commercial sector.
So I think if you're listening carefully, what you're starting to hear is a bargain. You're starting to hear the elements of a really good deal, through these types of capabilities, through these types of authorities, we could actually do some things that are powerful for defense. So, now I'm going to ask Max here, as you're thinking about building on the previous two comments, what more do you think the private sector can do to enhance this collaboration?
Well, plus one on the comments from the prior panelists. I would tell you, I think the best relationships, let me characterize the best ones, embody some kind of a two-way interaction where both parties are benefiting from the exchange and both parties have a mechanism to deal with the information provided. I think it might have been Thomas who said, sometimes you share information, you're never sure if it actually had an impact or not, or if it was useful or not. So one piece of any of those is a two-way mechanism. And recognize that different potential private sector partners bring different capabilities. AWS has the largest network footprint of any cloud service provider. And the result of that is we get to see and detect and provide remediation against an exceptionally large footprint. Using some of our tools, and the prior panel talked about, is AI good or bad? I would say AI is essential. So using some of our tools, which include AI, like Mithra, we're looking at over 200 trillion DNS events in a single AWS region. Inside the EU, we've got 6 regions today, and we're bringing online the new AWS European Sovereign Cloud, 7 regions. If you take a look at the footprint and the threat environment there, we're talking about 1.4 quadrillion events a day. And so that scale, and then the tools that we use to be able to detect, assess, and remediate at scale are powerful tools to be able to support our customers and share in a collective threat intelligence environment. The flip side is that well-intentioned or ill-conceived, I don't know which, but we also see policies that just create barriers. And some things maybe are statutory, and the private sector needs to realize that. But those things that are not statutory are the things where we need to work flexibly around so that policies and regulations don't prevent and block the type of sharing that's absolutely essential for our overall collective ability. So again, I guess I'm sort of like an optimist at heart, and I see opportunity, and I recognize the challenges that we see sometimes.
So it sounds like we continue to be optimistic. So this is definitely the most unique cybersecurity panel I've ever had the opportunity to moderate. So I just want to pause and recognize that. And I want to bring it down real quick. So I'm going to go to Jim where are we mismanaging the expectations? Because in order to do this, we have to be able to talk to each other and say, hey, these are results. These are results. But we're mismanaging those expectations. So help us out here.
Well, I think that I want to add a few things. One, we discussed scale, but also like there's very articulate attacks that we also see, right? All of our products run on top of each other, on a cell phone or on a laptop. Google, Microsoft, Snapchat, Cloudflare, one way or another, we're all intertwined. And when you're looking at that from a mobile platform, you actually get to see the more articulate state-sponsored attacks as they thread through the different applications. And so that's a really significant capability that government may not have the authorities or the rules to look at, but we do. It's on our platform, it's within our rules. You're violating our terms of service, we can take a look at it, and we can help and we can share. Where that breaks down is, again, I refer back to, okay, we found this vulnerability, we found this capability, or we found this attacker, and we can trace them to this government and this third party. And then, it goes into what I call deaf null. We lose sight of it. We don't know if we're helping or hurting. Sometimes we don't know if we've caught the actual attack of the people we're reporting it to. So until we can look at this where we're taking our capabilities and less rules and government's capabilities and authorities and put it into a joint effort. My dream is this. We have a joint cybersecurity room with big boards, and it's private and public sitting in there, all cooperating on the same mission. And that mission is to defend and disrupt. Until we can reach that, because that's hands-on keyboard, that's technical application, that's actual defense. Until we have that room or that building, I don't think we're going to be successful or as successful as our adversaries who do have that room.
So I think there's a pinpoint on that because, of course, there's so many rooms filled with so many screens that have all kinds of people sitting in them with all kinds of different representation and authorities. But what you said a moment ago was hands-on keyboards. And I think that is moving from an information sharing regime into a collaborative regime, which we've talked about in this forum before for many years. So I'm going to put a wild card question out there. What's next from there? If we can do information sharing, though we don't always share the results, if we can sit together, if we have the marketplaces behind us, what is the next stage considering what we heard on the first panel, the sobering threats that we all face? Maybe I'll begin with that wild card with you, Miguel.
Well, first of all, I like the idea that we all sit together and we work together. But even on governmental level, I can assure you that is quite a difficult one. You have the military environment, you have an intelligence environment, you have regulators, you have certs, you have justice and law enforcement, and everybody, even those teams, to get them together to handle an incident is already very, very challenging. Then you have the part where I think that if we want to work together, you have to build trust. And you see that a lot of companies, and I am sure that all the companies that are here are very trustworthy. But there are, for instance, hosters and telcos that are not that trustworthy. If we ask information, we will never get it. Even if the Justice Department asks information, they will never get it. They will find whatever excuse, but it was a proxy, it's not in your country, it's somewhere else. And I think that bit by bit, we should accept the fact that well, if we want to work together and we want to solve this problem, we will have to say, okay, you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And if you're part of the solution, we will work together and we will do this together. But if you're part of the problem, then, well, you might get into trouble with us in a different way. So honestly, I think that we have to work together with those parties and in trust and build trust, because the internet and the whole cyberspace is privately owned. When I leave this building, I'm on the street. It's public space. When I connect my home computer to my private network, to my telco, where is the public space? So it's all private space. So we have to think differently, and we have to accept that those people want to sit around the table with us. And we have to do that, and we have to collaborate. There are also those that are or choose to be part of the problem rather than of the solution.
So to you, Max, considering Miguel's comments, specifically home basing on trust, how can you give us a scenario that you see where we can do better?
Well, I was thinking about what Miguel said, and then I was also thinking about the comment of the utopian one room where we sit all together. And suddenly I felt like a pessimist. Because it's such a multifaceted, multi-layered challenge. I'm not sure that there is a one room that allows us to do that. I think it's more of improving the mechanisms that exist between the key stakeholders, whether they're private to private mechanisms, which, generally speaking, we work those out because they have to practically work, or whether it is the mechanism, that is the public-private mechanism between governments. So I don't think we could do the one room. However, I do have examples that work productively, and two of them. One is the Belgian Center for Cybersecurity. We've had a productive and a long-standing relationship there. In the U.S., we've had a productive relationship with CISA, and I think the key to that has been coordination and collaboration on response, and it's worked. And so it's not the into an unseen hole. And I think a lot of that is the structural underpinnings, but then a lot of it just relies upon getting the relationship going and building the trust and confidence in the partners that you're working with.
So what I'm hearing is that the right incentives are in place for both public and private partners to achieve certain outcomes. And I'm thinking a little bit in my mind of words that are being used oftentimes in conversations, both in open forums and in closed forums, to describe 2025. And the words that I'm thinking of are really transactional and zero sum. Both those words describe making a deal, really, in the end. And you're motivated to make a deal either because you know you can get a really good outcome, a good deal for yourself, or you're scared because you know the consequences of not making a deal are very dire. And I think in that rubric, we have an incredible impetus to try and make a really good deal here. So over to Jim. Considering the context so far, where is the most leverage? Where do we get the most bang for our buck?
Increasing the dollar per hack. So if we can find a way to make this economic for the attackers together, I think that we will make a heck of a lot more strides than we have today. I agree some things are working, but as a whole, I'm a CISO, so I'm sitting on the front line. I see the attacks every minute, every day, and I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm telling you, the way that we're set up now will not stop a massive cyber attack whatsoever. I promise you that. So until we can work together as a team, where there is trust, I think trust is actually the most important aspect of any deal, is where we're making it so difficult for at least criminal organizations to operate against us, that the dollar per hack, because they have budgets, they have infrastructures, they have bosses, that they have to go seek an alternative form of income, I think is one outcome that would be fantastic for us. But also, our state-sponsored enemies also understand economic warfare as well. I'm not describing that we should go into economic warfare, but anytime you want to get someone's attention and get them to the table to do a deal, you hit them in the wallet.
So to me, that sounds a bit about like convergence. We talk about convergence sometimes, the instruments of national power, bringing everything to bear to the outcome that we're trying to achieve. It's not just about the digital domain, it's about all the other associated capabilities that we can use to thwart the adversary set. What comes in the way sometimes is if we assume what the other side of the table is thinking about. And sometimes in public-private partnerships, the other side of the table is you're on the same side. you know? You're just trying to make a partnership work, and you might be assuming that the other side of the table has constraints. In my capacity, a lot of times I'm asking the question of my own team, you know, don't make any assumptions for me. Bring me all the options, and then we'll figure it out from there. I personally think that would be useful in this scenario. Tom, where are there assumptions that are holding us back?
You know, when you talked about transactional so much, I got a little bit concerned. It's a very popular word these days. Max mentioned trust. I think that's an important part. The incentives are in the right place. We've seen in warlike scenarios that these barriers come down immediately. We all don't want a conflict for us to get efficient. I think the most progress I saw in building up to these partnerships is actually moving transactional considerations on the side and leaning in order to achieve that first barrier of trust. You mentioned it, you know, sometimes we provide information and it just disappears in a black hole. We need the feedback of what works and what doesn't work. That is just how innovation works, the fast learning cycles. And if you just keep this on a purely transactional level from the start on, it's really hard to make progress. So leaning in, I think, is important here. That's the first part. And I like what Max said. We forget that it's transactional on the other side too, right? It's not only transactional on our side. I said it before, you know, they need a reliable infrastructure to work. They need efficient processes. Otherwise, they would not be able to target successfully large numbers of targets. And we want to disrupt this. So there is a way to use transactional incentives in a way to harm the other side, whether that is to increase the cost per hack or other means.
So I'd like to explore assumptions a little bit further. We just heard from Tom on some assumptions from the private sector side that we could reevaluate. And I like that you challenged the transactional nature. I want to maybe double click on this just for a moment. Like, you don't always have to have a benefit to do the right thing, I think is what you're trying to say. And I think that's kind of, that's a great comment. Miguel, where do you see assumptions being made on the government side about the private sector, or assumptions being made about the government side? Because in my time in government, I really believe each day we were guided by the principle of doing the right thing.
Yeah, and absolutely, I think we are doing, and we are thinking that for 2 decades, more or less. ENISA was created 2004, and if you take that document and you take all the documents between then and now, and well, you will find the same words: collaboration, information sharing, capacity building, resilience building, and I can go on. And so it's for 20 years that we are telling this. And if we detect, for instance, an intrusion of a state actor or state-sponsored actor, we see that the intrusion is there for a few years, meaning that we have not been capable of detecting that, and that probably there are other intrusions that we don't see. So if we think that we are doing such a great job, honestly, I'm not sure that this is the case, and I'm not that sure that we have everything under control. So where I think that we should go is sit together with the private sector. As I said, it's not public space, it's private space. And see what do we expect from us and how can we build that. If you look at the real world, what you expect from your government is to detect crime or detect anomalies, to respond. If somebody is driving a car drunk, you expect your government to stop that person from driving drunk. And I think that in the future, our governments will have to think, how can we pick up that responsibility? How can we improve detection of anomalies, and together with the private sector, make sure that we take our responsibility to take them down?
So I appreciate that. We're going to try and help Peter and team get a little bit back on time. So we got 2 minutes to go. Last question then. Private-public partnerships on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is failed and 5 is outstanding. We're expecting you to give a grade here. Max, we'll start with you.
And I've got 2 minutes? No, that's everybody.
Yeah, that's
okay,
everybody.
I got it. Get it. Keep on schedule. Well, I was going to give it a solid 2.5, but the fact that we've had the dialogue here, I think is going to cause me to be a little bit more optimistic to end. So I'm going to go with 2.6. I just still believe, there's so much opportunity. And Miguel, you're right. We started off with the info building, the collaboration, the capability building. We got to double down on that.
So a 2.6. Tom, what do you think?
We have ones for sure, and we also have fives. I would want to give more credit to the people who really try hard. So I would lead in and say it's north of 3, but there's plenty of room for improvement. It's not for a lack of trying. I think I don't want to be pessimistic here. And I think since the invasion of the Ukraine, the climate has changed significantly. We've all realized that the costs have gone up. And I think that makes me optimistic.
Jim?
I'm surprised that you didn't use pi. I'll use pi. 3.14. So,
I'm an engineer.
who you are. I want to be optimistic as well. Yes, it's in the threes, 3.14, whatever. But the potential, the opportunity is 10, without a doubt. And I'm very hopeful that one way or another, we are going to come together and achieve that.
So Miguel?
Well, I'm very happy we're going up and when we're going on my side. So let me give it then a 3.2. But, well, I give it a 3.2 first of all because I was courageous enough to join this panel. And secondly, I really believe that bit by bit, governments are understanding what their role is and how important it is to work together with that private sector, with all those companies, with the telcos, to make sure that environment is a much better place for us.
So I appreciate all of those comments. I appreciate all of you sharing this moment with me and with the entire audience here. I think, to a certain extent, considering the sobering comments in the very first panel, remembering Ukraine and threat actors from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, criminal organizations, I'm very happy to be leading the most optimistic panel in cybersecurity. We have to get a 10. Thank you, everybody.